On Christmas Eve, Elena Voss walked into her childhood bedroom, carrying the miracle she'd waited 17 years to receive. A child was growing inside her 47-year-old body. What she found instead was her husband, Marco Duca, the most feared crime boss in the city, tangled in sheets with her younger sister. The image burned itself into her retinas. Livia's painted nails on Marco's chest, their bodies moving together where family photographs watched from the walls. In that moment, something inside Elena didn't break, it froze solid. Because when you're pregnant with a miracle, you don't just survive betrayal. You become something far more dangerous. The Victorian mansion on Blackwell Heights had belonged to Elena's family for 3 generations, before her father gambled it away to cover debts that Marco Duca eventually forgave. That forgiveness came with a price. Elena's hand in marriage, a transaction dressed up as romance. She'd been 23 then, young enough to mistake possession for passion and control for devotion. 24 years later, she still remembered every detail of this house. The 4th step on the main staircase that creaked, the loose floorboard outside her childhood bedroom, the way afternoon light filtered through the stained glass window on the landing, painting the walls in jewel tones that shifted with the seasons. She'd insisted on hosting Christmas Eve dinner here this year. Marco had bought the house back 5 years ago, a gift for their anniversary that felt more like reclaiming territory than a romantic gesture. But Elena didn't care about the motivation. She cared that her son, this precious, impossible miracle, would be born in the same house where she'd taken her first breath. At 47, after 17 years of negative pregnancy tests and 3 miscarriages that had nearly destroyed her, Elena had stopped hoping, stopped counting days, stopped pretending that the emptiness in Marco's eyes when he looked at her wasn't because she'd failed to give him an heir. Then 2 months ago, Dr. Sarah Chen had called her back into the examination room with an expression Elena couldn't read. Sarah told her she was pregnant, her voice careful, about 6 weeks along. Elena had actually laughed because the joke seemed too cruel, even for the universe that had spent nearly 2 decades denying her this one thing. She said that it wasn't possible. They hadn't been trying. She stopped, realizing what she was about to admit, that her husband hadn't touched her in months, that he came to bed late and left early, that his phone buzzed constantly with messages he deleted before she could see the screen, that the distance between them had grown so vast she could barely remember what closeness felt like. But Sarah's expression hadn't changed. The doctor explained her blood work was conclusive and she was pregnant. Given her age and medical history, this was going to be high risk. Sarah said she would need to see her every 2 weeks, possibly weekly as they got further along. Elena had driven home in a daze, one hand pressed against her still flat stomach, trying to process the impossible. She'd walked into their penthouse apartment in the financial district. It was all neutral grays and blacks, with sharp edges and cold marble, everything Marco's decorator had chosen. She found him in his study, bourbon in hand, staring at spreadsheets that she knew had nothing to do with his legitimate real estate holdings. She said from the doorway that she was pregnant. Marco had looked up, his handsome face carefully blank. At 51, he still carried himself like the street fighter he'd been in his 20s before he'd killed the right people and married into the right family. His dark hair had gone silver at the temples, his jaw still sharp, his eyes still that particular shade of gray that could look like storm clouds or steel depending on his mood. He asked what she said. The word came out flat. She repeated she was pregnant. 6 weeks. Dr. Chen confirmed it today. He'd set down his glass very carefully. He said it wasn't possible. Apparently, it was. She'd moved into the room close enough to smell the expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of cigar smoke that clung to him. She told him they were having a baby. Something had flickered across his face then. Surprise, maybe fear, possibly even hope. He asked if she was sure. She told him blood work doesn't lie. He'd stood, crossed the distance between them, and placed one hand on her shoulder. The touch felt foreign, like a half-remembered dance step. He said, "Christ, Elena, that's incredible." But he hadn't pulled her into his arms, hadn't kissed her, had barely seemed to know what to do with the information beyond processing it. Like another business development that required a strategic response. She continued, filling the awkward silence that it was high risk. Given her age, she'd need to be monitored closely. He said, "Whatever you need." His hand had dropped away. He said they'd get the best doctors, the best care. Elena told him Sarah was already the best. Then he said they'd make sure she has whatever resources she requires. They'd stood there, two people who'd shared a bed for 24 years, talking about their miracle baby, like it was a merger acquisition that required proper due diligence. That had been 2 months ago. Since then, Elena had thrown herself into preparing for this child with the same methodical focus she'd once applied to her abandoned art career, to running the charitable foundation that bore her family's name, to all the acceptable ways a crime boss's wife was permitted to occupy her time. She'd converted one of the guest rooms in the penthouse into a nursery, choosing soft creams and warm grays herself this time, ignoring Marco's decorator. She'd read every pregnancy book Dr. Chen recommended. She had started taking daily walks, eating organic everything, attending prenatal yoga classes with women half her age who looked at her like she was brave or crazy, or both. And she'd tried very hard not to notice that Marco was home even less than before, that his phone calls had become more secretive, and that he'd started smelling like that wasn't hers. Christmas Eve dinner had been her idea, a family gathering to announce the pregnancy properly, to share the joy she was trying desperately to feel beneath the anxiety and the loneliness. Her younger sister, Livia, had driven up from the city. Marco's mother, Sophia, had flown in from Miami. His consigliere, Carmine Valente, and several other key family members had been invited, though Elena suspected they'd be talking business in Marco's study before dessert was served. The mansion staff had outdone themselves. The dining room glittered with crystal and silver. The 12-foot tree in the grand foyer sparkled with lights that cast dancing shadows across the marble floors. Everything looked perfect, but felt empty. Elena had excused herself before dinner to rest, following Dr. Chen's orders. The pregnancy was wearing on her more than she'd expected. Fatigue hit like a physical weight, nausea that came in unpredictable waves, headaches that made her vision blur at the edges. She'd climbed the familiar stairs, her hand trailing along the banister she'd slid down as a child, headed for her old bedroom, where she'd planned to lie down for 20 minutes, before forcing herself back into hostess mode. The door was closed but not locked. She'd pushed it open quietly, not wanting to disturb anything, just wanting a moment of peace in a room that still held fragments of who she'd been before she'd become Mrs. Marco Duca. The afternoon light through the lace curtains painted everything in soft gold. Her old four-poster bed with its white duvet, the window seat where she'd spent hours reading, the photographs on the dresser of her parents, before the gambling, before the debts, before everything fell apart. And on that white duvet, moving together like they had every right to be there, were Marco and Livia. Elena's brain tried to reject what her eyes were seeing, tried to rewrite the scene into something explainable, something that wasn't her husband buried inside her sister, their bodies slick with sweat, Livia's head thrown back in pleasure, and Marco's hands gripping her hips with a hunger Elena hadn't seen directed at her in years. The sound Livia made, breathless and wanting, finally broke through Elena's paralysis. Livia gasped, her voice thick with pleasure, telling Marco right there, "Don't stop." Elena's hand found the door frame, fingers digging into wood that had been painted and repainted dozens of times over the decades. Her vision tunneled. Sound became muffled like she was underwater. Marco saw her first. His eyes met hers over Livia's shoulder. And for one terrible second, Elena saw something that looked almost like relief cross his face. Like being caught was better than continuing to hide. He pulled away from Livia fast, scrambling backward on the bed, but the damage was done. The image was burned into Elena's retinas where it would live forever. Her husband, her sister, this room, this house, this day. Livia turned, following Marco's gaze. Her face, so beautiful, so young at 38, with the same dark hair and green eyes Elena had once possessed before time, and disappointment dulled them, registered shock, then something else, something that might have been satisfaction. Marco said her name, his voice rough. He was reaching for his pants, for any scrap of dignity to cover the naked truth between them. He started to say, "This isn't what it looks like," Elena said calmly and coldly. "Don't." The word surprised her. She'd expected hysteria, tears, collapse. Instead, she felt eerily detached, like she was watching this scene happen to someone else. She told him, "Don't you dare tell me this isn't what it looks like." Livia pulled the sheet around herself, but made no move to leave the bed. She said, "Lena, I'm so sorry. We didn't mean for you to find out this way." The casual cruelty of that statement, The implication that there was a better way to discover your husband was sleeping with your sister cut through Elena's shock. How long? Her voice stayed steady. Her hand moved from the doorframe to her stomach, a protective instinct overriding everything else. Marco started to speak, but she cut him off. She asked how long. She looked at Livia now, really looked at her, at the sister she'd raised after their mother died, who she'd supported through college, through a failed marriage, through every crisis and drama. The sister she'd welcomed into her home, into her life, never imagining she was also welcoming her into her bed. Livia had the decency to look away. 6 months. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of family dinners where Livia smiled at her across the table, of phone calls where her sister asked how she was doing, if everything was okay with Marco. Was Elena happy? Elena repeated, 6 months. The same amount of time she'd been pregnant. She did the math automatically. Her artist's brain that still calculated proportions and perspectives, even after years of abandoning her painting. So, this started around the time of the summer gala, the charity event Ana had planned for months, where she'd worn the emerald dress Marco said, made her look old, where Livia had flown in to help, and where Marco had spent most of the evening on his phone, distracted and distant. Livia's voice was small now, but she said yes. Underneath it, Elena caught something that wasn't quite defiance, but not quite remorse either. Marco had his pants on now, and was pulling on his shirt with shaking hands. He told Elena they needed to talk about this rationally. Rationally? Elena laughed, and the sound was wrong, brittle and sharp. You want to have a rational conversation about why you're fucking my sister in my childhood bed on Christmas Eve while I'm carrying your baby. Livia's shock seemed genuine. She asked, "You're pregnant?" And somehow that made everything worse. Elena said 8 weeks, then met Marco's eyes. Though I suppose you already knew that, given that I told you 2 months ago. She asked him, "Did you tell her? Did you discuss my miracle pregnancy while you were planning your next rendezvous?" Marco insisted it wasn't like that. He moved toward her, and Elena stepped back instinctively. "Don't come near me." Her hand pressed harder against her stomach, as if she could shield the life growing there from this ugliness. "Don't you dare come near me," he pleaded with her, genuine anguish in his voice. "Now, let me explain. Explain what? That you fell in love? That this just happened? That you couldn't help yourself?" Each word was a blade cutting through years of delusion. She demanded, "Tell me, Marco, how does a man sleep with his wife's sister in the house where his wife grew up, in the room where she was a child, and think there's any explanation that makes it acceptable?" Livia finally moved, sliding off the bed with the sheet wrapped around her. And Elena saw the red marks on her sister's neck, on her shoulders. Marks Marco's mouth had made, probably made dozens of times before. Livia's voice was quiet but firm. She said, "I love him. I know that doesn't make it right, but I need you to know that this isn't just, we love each other, Lena." The use of her childhood nickname from Livia's mouth felt like another violation. Love. Elena tasted the word, found it bitter. "You love him? How noble," she asked her little sister. "Did you love him when I was sitting beside you at Mom's funeral? When I paid for your wedding to that bastard who hit you? When I gave you a job at my foundation because you couldn't hold down anything else?" Livia's chin lifted, defiant now. "That's not fair." Fair. Elena felt something hot and vicious rise in her chest, breaking through the ice. "You want to talk to me about fair? You who's had everything handed to you, because I sacrificed everything to take care of you after Mom died. I was 18, Livia. I gave up my scholarship to art school to raise you. I married Marco to save our family's house, to pay off Dad's debt so you wouldn't grow up in poverty. And this is how you repay me." Livia shot back, color flooding her cheeks. "Nobody asked you to be a martyr. You made your choices, Lena. You married Marco for money and security. You always said you didn't marry for love." Elena's voice rose despite herself, because love wasn't an option. "I was 23 years old, barely more than a child myself, and I had to marry a man I barely knew to save everything. But I stayed, Livia. I tried. I built a life with him, even if it wasn't the life I dreamed of. I earned the right to expect loyalty at the very least." Marco stepped between them, and Elena saw his face properly for the first time since she'd walked in. He looked wrecked, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. But underneath the guilt, she saw something else, something that looked like exhaustion with the pretense. He said quietly, "You're right, you deserved loyalty. You deserve better than this." Elena held up her hand. Don't you dare get noble now, Marco. You don't get to ease your conscience by acknowledging what you destroyed. I'm not trying to ease anything. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd seen 1,000 times before. I'm trying to be honest. Finally, honest. Elena felt hysteria bubbling up again. You want honesty? Fine. Tell me honestly. Is this baby even yours? The question hung in the air like poison gas. Marco's face went white. Of course it is, he said, but Elena heard the uncertainty underneath. She asked if it was, because he said himself it wasn't possible. They hadn't had sex in, she was doing math she didn't want to do. 4 months. Maybe 5. And she was 8 weeks along, which means conception was around the conference in Chicago. Marco finished, his voice hollow. When you came to surprise me. Elena remembered that night with crystal clarity. She'd flown in unexpectedly wanting to rekindle something, anything. They'd had dinner, drinks, had gone back to his hotel room. The sex had been awkward and rushed, both of them trying too hard, but she'd thought maybe it was a beginning. So it is yours, she said. This baby you don't want with a wife you don't love is actually yours. What a cosmic joke. He said he never said he didn't want it. Elena's control finally cracked. You didn't have to say it. I've seen it in your eyes every time you look at me. Marco, the disappointment, the resentment, like I failed you by not getting pregnant all those years. And now that I finally am, it's too late. I'm too old, too damaged, too much of a reminder of everything you settled for. He said it wasn't true, but his denial sounded weak. Elena turned to Livia. Isn't it? That's why you're here, isn't it? Young, beautiful, uncomplicated Livia, the sister who's everything I'm not anymore, the one who can give him what he really wants. Livia's voice wavered. It's not about that. Lena, you don't understand. Elena's voice echoed off the walls of her childhood bedroom. Then make me understand. Explain to me how betraying your sister, who raised you, who loved you, who gave up everything for you, makes any kind of sense. Because you're not the only one who sacrificed. Livia's composure finally shattered. You think you're the only one who gave something up? I watched you marry the man I. She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. The confession hung incomplete, but Elena heard it anyway. The man you what, Livia? The man you wanted. You were 14 when I married Marco. 14. Livia's voice was defiant through her tears. I grew up. I watched you two together for years, watching him look at you like you were a business transaction, watching you pretend to be happy in your perfect penthouse with your perfect life. And I knew I could make him happy. Really happy, not just comfortable. So this was mercy. Elena felt detached again, floating above the scene. You seduced my husband out of pity. How charitable. Livia shouted, I love him. I love him in a way you never did, in a way you never could because you never chose him. You were sold to him. The truth of that statement cut deeper than Elena expected because Livia was right. She'd never chosen Marco. She'd accepted him as the price of survival, had built what she thought was affection from the ashes of obligation. But that didn't make the betrayal hurt less. Elena said quietly, You're right. I didn't choose him, but I chose to stay. I chose to try. I chose to honor my vows even when it was hard, even when I felt invisible, even when I knew he was pulling away. I chose loyalty, Livia, something you clearly know nothing about. She turned to Marco, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. And you let her believe this was love. You let her think she was saving you from your miserable marriage. But we both know what this really is. What? His voice was barely audible, an escape. You wanted to feel young again. Wanted to pretend you weren't trapped in a marriage you regret with a wife who reminds you of every compromise you've made. And Livia was there, willing, eager to worship you the way I stopped years ago. Marco started to object, but Elena cut him off. Yes, it is. Because if you really loved her, you would have left me. You would have faced the consequences, dealt with your family's reaction, handled the fallout. But you didn't. You kept both of us like the greedy bastard you are. You kept your legitimate wife and your dutiful heir-to-be. And you kept your mistress, who makes you feel like a man instead of a monster. The accusation landed hard. Marco's jaw clenched, and Elena saw the flash of anger in his eyes. The same anger that made other men fear him, that had built his empire on blood and intimidation. But she wasn't afraid of him. Not anymore. Fear required caring about consequences. And right now, standing in her childhood bedroom, watching her marriage burn, Elena couldn't muster the energy to care about anything beyond the life growing inside her. She said, Get out, both of you. Marco reached for her. Elena repeated, I said, get out. Her voice cracked on the words. Get out of this room. Out of this house. I can't look at either of you right now without wanting to. She stopped, pressing her hand against her stomach again as a wave of nausea rolled through her. Just go. Livia grabbed her clothes from the floor and tried one more time. Lena, please, we need to talk about. But Elena's voice was ice. There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice. You both did. Now leave me alone to figure out mine. She stood there watching them awkward silence. Safint, watching them avoid each other's eyes as the enormity of being caught settled over them. When they were finally clothed, Marco tried one more time. He asked where she would go. She told him that's not his concern anymore. He insisted, "You're pregnant with my child. Everything about you is my concern." Really? Because you seemed pretty unconcerned about me when you were inside my sister 5 minutes ago. The crudeness of her words made him flinch, which gave Elena a savage satisfaction. She wanted him to hurt, wanted them both to feel even a fraction of the devastation carving through her chest. They left finally, Marco's hand briefly touching Livia's back in a gesture of comfort that made Elena's stomach turn. She heard them on the stairs, heard the murmur of voices as they must have encountered someone, probably Sophia or Carmine, someone who would take one look at their faces and know something had gone catastrophically wrong. Elena closed the door behind them and locked it. Her hands were shaking now, her breath coming in short gasps. She made it to the window seat before her legs gave out. Collapsing onto the faded cushions where she'd spent countless hours as a girl, dreaming of a future that looked nothing like this. The room spun around her. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the sun set over the city, painting the sky in reds and golds that seemed obscene in their beauty. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Marco, probably, or Livia, some attempt to explain or apologize or whatever people did when they destroyed someone's life. She pulled it out, saw Marco's name, and threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and fell silent. The screen cracked, but still glowing with his incoming call. The nausea hit harder this time, and Elena barely made it to the attached bathroom before she was sick, heaving into the toilet until there was nothing left. Her body purging itself of everything except the child she couldn't lose, wouldn't lose, would protect with every breath she had left. When the retching finally stopped, she sat back against the cool tile floor and let herself cry. Not delicate tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook her whole body, that came from somewhere so deep she hadn't known it existed. She cried for the marriage she'd tried to make work, for the sister she'd loved, for the girl she'd been in this room, full of dreams about art and love, and a life that was hers to choose. For the baby growing inside her who would be born into this wreckage. But underneath the grief, underneath the betrayal and the shock and the pain, something else was growing too. Something cold and hard and utterly focused. Elena had spent 24 years being Mrs. Marco Duca, the elegant wife, who hosted charity galas and smiled for photographs, and never asked too many questions about where the money really came from. She'd been the good girl, who'd sacrificed her dreams to save her family, who'd married for duty instead of love, who'd accepted her role and played it perfectly. That woman was dead now, bleeding out on the bathroom floor of her childhood bedroom. What was rising in her place was something different, something that understood that survival required more than endurance. It required strategy, planning, the kind of ruthless calculation that Marco had always possessed, but she'd convinced herself she was too soft to embrace. She was wrong about that. She wasn't soft. She was a woman who'd raised a child while still a child herself, who'd navigated the dangerous waters of marrying into a crime family, who'd survived 17 years of fertility treatments and miscarriages, and still managed to conceive at 47. She was strong. She'd always been strong. She just hadn't realized that strength could be sharp. Elena pulled herself up from the floor, rinsed her mouth, and splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection in the mirror looked haunted. It was red-rimmed, skin pale, hair disheveled. But underneath the devastation, she saw something new looking back at her. Determination. Her phone buzzed again from where it lay cracked on the bedroom floor. This time it was a text from Sophia, asking where she was. Guests were asking. Marco left and said there was an emergency. An emergency. That's what he was calling it. The destruction of his marriage. The betrayal of his wife. Just another emergency to be managed, controlled, spun into an acceptable narrative. Elena typed back with shaking fingers that she was unwell. She asked Sophia to please apologize to everyone and send them home. Christmas dinner was canceled. She didn't wait for a response. Instead, she gathered her coat, her purse, the few belongings she brought to the house. She took one last look around the room where her childhood had ended in so many ways. First, when her father had lost everything. Again, when she'd agreed to marry Marco. And finally today, when she'd learned that even sacrifice couldn't protect you from betrayal. The house was in chaos when she descended the stairs. Guests milling in confusion. Carmine Valente watching her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Sofia trying to maintain order while clearly dying to know what had happened. Elena walked past all of them without explanation, her head high, her hand protective over her stomach. She made it to her car, the Mercedes SUV Marco had insisted she drive for safety, before anyone tried to stop her. Carmine caught her at the driver's door, his hand on her elbow, gentle but firm. "Mrs. Duca, perhaps you shouldn't drive. You look unwell." She met his eyes, saw the calculation there. Carmine Valente was Marco's right hand, his consigliere, the man who knew every secret and managed every crisis. Whatever Marco was to the family, Carmine was the architect behind it. She lied, saying she was fine. He replied, "With respect, you're not. Let me drive you home or call someone." She repeated that she was fine and pulled her arm free, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Please go back inside and help Sofia with the guests." Carmine's voice dropped lower. "Marco called me. He said there was a situation that you might need." She cut him off. "I don't need anything from Marco." She opened the car door. Not anymore. She drove away from the house without looking back, her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. The sun had set fully now, and the city lights blurred into streamers of color that hurt her eyes. She didn't go back to the penthouse, couldn't face those cold marble floors and neutral walls that had never felt like home. Instead, she drove to the one place that did. The small art studio she'd kept all these years, tucked away in a converted warehouse in the arts district, the one space that was entirely hers. She hadn't painted in years. The canvases were covered in dust, the brushes dried out. The whole space was more of a storage unit than a creative refuge, but it was hers, bought with her own inheritance before she'd married Marco, and maintained with the modest income from her family's trust. Elena let herself in, turned on the lights, and stood in the middle of her abandoned dreams. Unfinished paintings leaned against the walls, landscapes and portraits, and abstracts from another life, when she'd still believed art could save her. She sank onto the old futon she'd kept for late nights, wrapped herself in a paint-stained blanket, and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The betrayal, the rage, the fear, but also something else, something that felt almost like relief. Because now she knew. Now she understood exactly where she stood, what she was working with, who she could trust. Nobody. She could trust nobody but herself, and the child growing inside her. Elena's hand spread across her stomach again, feeling for movement, even though it was too early. But she imagined she could feel something, a flutter, a whisper, a promise. She thought fiercely, "I will protect you, no matter what it costs, no matter who I have to become." Her phone buzzed continuously. Marco calling, Livia texting, Sofia demanding to know what was happening. Elena ignored all of it, turning the phone face down and closing her eyes. Tomorrow she would figure out her next move. Tomorrow she would decide what kind of woman rises from the ashes of betrayal. But tonight, Christmas Eve, in her dusty studio, surrounded by abandoned dreams, Elena Voss Duca let herself mourn everything she'd lost and began planning what she would take back. Elena woke to pale winter light streaming through the studio's industrial windows and the immediate, crushing memory of why she was here instead of in her bed. Her neck ached from the futon, her mouth tasted like copper, and when she tried to sit up, the nausea hit so hard she barely made it to the small bathroom before she was sick again. When the retching finally stopped, she sat on the cold tile floor and tried to take inventory. Her phone showed 43 missed calls, 27 text messages, and 3 voicemails. She deleted them all without reading or listening. Whatever Marco or Livia or anyone else wanted to say could wait until she figured out how to breathe without feeling like her chest was caving in. The date on her phone caught her attention. Christmas Day. She was supposed to wake up at the mansion, make breakfast, open presents with Marco's family, play the role of grateful wife, celebrating the holiday with her miracle pregnancy. Instead, she was huddled on a bathroom floor in a warehouse district. Her marriage in ruins, her sister dead to her, and absolutely no idea what happened next. Her phone rang again. Dr. Sarah Chen this time. Elena answered before she could think better of it. Sarah's voice was tight with concern. "Elena, thank God. I just got a very alarming call from Marco saying you're in distress and refusing to come home. Are you okay? Is the baby okay? The lie came automatically. I'm fine. Marco overreacting. Sarah pushed back. Your blood pressure has been borderline at your last 2 appointments. If you're experiencing any kind of stress or trauma, I need to see you immediately. High-risk pregnancies don't forgive emotional upheaval. Elena closed her eyes. Of course, Marco had called her doctor. Of course, he was already managing the situation, controlling the narrative, making sure everyone saw him as the concerned husband worried about his fragile wife. She said she'd come in today, because arguing would only make Sarah more worried. This afternoon, if you have availability. Sarah replied, I'll make availability. 2 o'clock. And, Lena, whatever's happening, your primary job right now is protecting that baby. Everything else is secondary. After Sarah hung up, Elena forced herself to stand, to wash her face, to look at her reflection with something resembling honesty. She looked like hell. Dark circles under her eyes, skin pale and waxy, hair a tangled mess. But underneath the exhaustion, she saw something that hadn't been there yesterday. Clarity. For 17 years, she'd wanted a baby so desperately, it had consumed her. Every negative test had been a small death, every miscarriage, a devastation that took months to recover from. She'd poured everything into that wanting, had let it define her worth, her purpose, her identity. And now that she finally had it, now that the miracle she'd prayed for was growing inside her, she understood something she should have realized years ago. A baby wouldn't fix her marriage, wouldn't make Marco love her, wouldn't erase the fundamental truth that she'd built her life on obligation instead of choice. But that baby was still hers, still depending on her, still deserving of a mother who was strong enough to protect it from the wreckage of her mistakes. Elena showered in the studio's cramped bathroom, changed into the spare clothes she kept in an old locker, and made herself eat the protein bar she found in her purse, even though it tasted like cardboard. Then she sat down with a sketch pad, something she hadn't touched in years, and started making lists. Not emotional lists, not grievances or hurts or betrayals, but strategic lists. What she knew, what she needed to find out, what resources she had, what leverage she could use. Because if 24 years as Marco Duca's wife had taught her anything, it was that power came from information and timing. And right now, she had more information than Marco realized. She knew about the offshore accounts he thought she hadn't noticed, the property holdings in shell corporations, the cash flow that didn't match his supposed legitimate business dealings. She'd spent years being the perfect mob wife, never asking questions, never looking too closely at the foundation of their wealth. But she'd still been paying attention. Elena was 3 pages into her inventory when her phone rang again, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. The voice was unfamiliar, male, with a faint accent she couldn't place. Mrs. Duca? My name is Victor Reyes. I'm an attorney specializing in high-net-worth divorce cases. I was given your number by a mutual acquaintance who thought you might benefit from a consultation. She replied that she didn't ask for a lawyer. No, but you're going to need one, especially if you're considering leaving Marco Duca. He paused. I know who your husband is, Mrs. Duca. I know what he does, and I know that wives in your position often find themselves with very few options when they try to leave. She asked how he got her number. He said, let's just say I have connections in places that hear things. Your situation isn't as private as you might hope. Word travels fast in certain circles, especially on Christmas Eve, when a major family gathering ends abruptly with the host and his sister-in-law disappearing together. Elena's stomach clenched. If the story was already circulating, if people were already talking, then Marco would be in damage control mode, which meant she needed to move faster than he expected. She said carefully, I'm listening, not on the phone. Can you meet me this afternoon? I have an office in the financial district, but I'd suggest somewhere more neutral, less chance of being observed. They agreed on a coffee shop in a neighborhood where neither of them would be recognized. Elena hung up, feeling like she'd just stepped off a cliff. But there was no going back now. The moment she'd walked in on Marco and Livia, every choice she'd made for the last 24 years had become unmade. She arrived at Dr. Chen's office 20 minutes early, sat in her car, and tried to prepare herself for questions she didn't want to answer. But when she finally walked into the examination room, Sarah took one look at her face and asked what happened. Elena said she'd rather not discuss it. Sarah replied, Elena, I'm not asking as your friend, I'm asking as your doctor. Whatever happened, your blood pressure is going to reflect it. And I need to know if we're dealing with acute stress or ongoing trauma. So Elena told her, not everything, but enough. The betrayal, the shock, the uncertainty about what came next. Sarah listened without interrupting, her professional mask firmly in place, but Elena saw the flash of anger in her eyes. When Elena finished, Sarah said, "That son of a bitch. And on Christmas Eve, while you're pregnant with his child." Elena told her it had been going on for 6 months. The timing was just when she found out. Sarah said, "That doesn't make it better," and pulled out her blood pressure cuff. Arms up. "And I'm telling you right now, if these numbers are bad, I'm putting you on modified bed rest. Your body can't sustain this level of stress without consequences." The reading was high, but not catastrophic. Sarah made Elena lie down for 20 minutes, took it again, and found it slightly improved. "You're lucky," Sarah said, her voice stern. "Your body is handling this better than it should be. But Elena, you cannot let this continue. You need to remove yourself from the source of stress. Find somewhere safe and quiet, and focus entirely on this pregnancy. Everything else, the divorce, the betrayal, the family drama, all of that has to wait until this baby is born healthy." Elena said she couldn't just ignore what's happening. Sarah insisted. "Yes, you can, because the alternative is risking your child's life, and I know you won't do that." Sarah sat on the stool, her expression softening. "I've been your doctor for 8 years. I've held your hand through 3 miscarriages and more negative tests than I can count. I've seen how much you want this baby. Don't let your husband's betrayal destroy the one thing you've wanted more than anything." Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. She said she didn't know how to just walk away from everything. Then don't walk away, but don't engage either. Not yet. Give yourself time to think, to plan, to make decisions from a place of calm instead of chaos. Sarah handed her a tissue. She asked where Elena was staying. "My old art studio. Is it safe, clean? Do you have what you need?" "It's fine, Elena. It's better than going home to Marco." Sarah sighed. "Fair enough, but I want to see you in 1 week, not 2. And if your blood pressure isn't down, we're having a serious conversation about hospitalized bed rest." Elena left the clinic feeling more exhausted than when she'd arrived. The meeting with Victor Reyes was in an hour, barely enough time to grab something to eat and try to make herself look less like someone whose life had imploded. The coffee shop was in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a nail salon, the kind of anonymous place where nobody looked at anyone too closely. Victor Reyes was already there when she arrived. Mid-50s, expensively dressed but not flashy, with sharp eyes that assessed her in one quick sweep. "Mrs. Duca," he stood and shook her hand. "Thank you for meeting me." She asked him what he meant by specializing in high-net-worth divorces. "How high are we talking?" He smiled. "The kind where assets are complicated, where one party has significantly more power than the other, where standard divorce proceedings would leave the weaker party vulnerable." He paused. "I've handled 3 divorces from organized crime figures. 2 of my clients are still alive and living comfortably under new identities. The 3rd violated the terms of our agreement and talked to the wrong people. The implied threat was clear." Elena sat down slowly. "Are you telling me I'm in danger?" "I'm telling you that divorcing Marco Duca is more complicated than filing paperwork. Your husband has resources, connections, and a vested interest in maintaining certain appearances. A messy public divorce doesn't serve his interests. So, he'll what? Make me disappear. Unlikely, given your pregnancy. But he might make it very difficult for you to leave with anything resembling your dignity or financial security intact." Victor leaned forward. "Unless you plan ahead, unless you document everything, secure your own resources, and give yourself leverage. What kind of leverage?" "The kind that comes from knowing where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking." He pulled out a tablet. "How much do you actually know about your husband's business operations?" Elena thought about the list she'd started making that morning. "More than he thinks I do." "Good, because the key to surviving this divorce is making yourself more valuable, alive, and cooperative than dead or silenced. You need to be the person who can destroy him if he pushes too hard, but who's willing to stay quiet in exchange for fair terms. You want me to blackmail my husband. I want you to negotiate from a position of strength instead of victimhood. There's a difference." Victor's expression was professionally neutral. "Your husband is in a vulnerable position right now. His affair with your sister will play very poorly with certain elements of his organization. The traditionalists, the ones who still value family loyalty and honor. If that story spreads, It undermines his authority. It's already spreading. You heard about it. Exactly. Which means Marco needs this contained quickly and quietly. He needs you to accept a divorce settlement that makes you go away without causing problems. He's probably already working on what that offer looks like. Elena's phone buzzed. Speak of the devil. A text from Carmine Valente. We need to talk. Marco would like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss arrangements somewhere neutral. Just the three of us. She showed the message to Victor, who nodded. That's faster than I expected. He must be more worried about the fallout than I thought. What should I tell him? That you're willing to meet, but you want your attorney present. That'll let him know you're not going to be bullied or manipulated. I haven't actually hired you yet. Victor smiled. Consider this a free consultation. But if you're serious about protecting yourself and your child, you're going to need someone like me in your corner. Elena looked at this man who'd appeared in her life with convenient timing and specialized expertise. Who told you to contact me? I'm not at liberty to say, but I will tell you that you have friends in unexpected places, Mrs. Duca. People who would prefer to see Marco taken down a few notches. People who think a messy divorce might be exactly the kind of distraction that serves their interests. So, I'm a pawn in someone else's game. Or you're a queen who just discovered she's been playing with half the pieces missing. Victor closed his tablet. Marco's enemies are willing to help you, Elena. The question is whether you're willing to help yourself. After he left, Elena sat in her car and stared at Carmine's message. The smart move was probably to hire Victor to play the game the way Marco would play it, ruthlessly, strategically, with no room for sentiment or weakness. But something about it felt wrong, like she was trading one kind of powerlessness for another, letting strangers with their own agendas dictate her choices. She texted Carmine back. I'll meet with Marco, but not tomorrow. I need time to think, and I want my own representation present. Response came immediately. Understood. We'll wait for you to set the time and place. Please know that Marco deeply regrets what happened and wants to make this right. Elena almost laughed. Make it right. As if there was any way to undo the image of her husband inside her sister, to unknow what she now knew about the foundation of her marriage. She drove back to the studio as night fell, stopping to buy groceries, bland food her stomach might tolerate, prenatal vitamins, basic supplies for a longer stay. The studio wasn't meant for extended living, but with some cleaning and organizing, it could work until she figured out what came next. She was unloading bags when her phone rang. Livia this time. Elena stared at her sister's name on the screen, felt rage and grief war inside her chest, she answered. Livia said immediately, Don't hang up. Please, Lena, just give me 5 minutes. You have 3. I know you hate me. I know I destroyed everything between us, but I need you to understand I never meant for you to get hurt. You fucked my husband for 6 months, Livia. How exactly did you think that was going to end? Her sister's voice cracked. I thought maybe you'd leave him, that you'd find out and realize you deserved better, and just walk away. Then Marco and I could be together without all this mess. So, your plan was for me to divorce my husband so you could have him guilt-free. How thoughtful. It sounds terrible when you say it like that. It is terrible. You're terrible. What you did is unforgivable. Silence stretched between them. Then Livia said, I'm pregnant too. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. What? 10 weeks. I found out 2 days ago. I was going to tell you at Christmas dinner. Ask for your advice on how to handle it. Livia laughed. A broken sound. Ironic, right? Asking my sister how to tell her husband I'm carrying his baby. Elena's hand went to her own stomach, protective and possessive. Does Marco know? Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. My doctor confirmed it yesterday morning. So, you celebrated by sleeping with him in my childhood bed. I know how it looks. Elena's voice was ice. You know nothing. You don't know what it's like to spend 17 years trying to have a baby. To fail over and over while everyone watches and judges and pities you. To finally get pregnant at 47 and think maybe this is your redemption. Maybe this baby will make everything you sacrificed worth it. And then to discover that your sister, the person you raised, protected, loved, is also pregnant with your husband's child. How far along did you say? 10 weeks? Yes. So, you got pregnant before I did? Before Marco and I had that one night in Chicago that created this baby I'm carrying. Elena felt hysteria rising. Did you know I was trying? Did Marco tell you we were going to that fertility clinic one last time? That we were making one final attempt? He mentioned it. Yes. And you still slept with him. You still let him come inside. You still risked this exact situation. Livia's voice rose. I love him. I love him and he loves me. And yes, the timing is awful. And yes, I know it hurts you. But that doesn't make what we have less real. You want to know what's real, Livia? What's real is that you're a selfish child who's never grown up. What's real is that Marco is a coward who couldn't choose between his wife and his mistress, so he kept both. And what's real is that there are now 2 babies involved who didn't ask for any of this. I know you're angry. Elena's voice went flat. I'm not angry. I'm done. You're going to tell Marco about your pregnancy. You're going to deal with whatever consequences come from that. And you're going to stay away from me for the rest of your life. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more. You're dead to me, Livia. The sister I raised, the person I loved, she's gone. You killed her when you betrayed me. Elena hung up before Livia could respond, blocked her number, and stood in the middle of her studio, shaking with rage and grief, and something that felt uncomfortably like fear. 2 babies. Marco was going to have 2 children, 2 heirs, both born within weeks of each other to 2 sisters. The scandal would be massive, unavoidable, the kind of thing that destroyed reputations and weakened organizations, which meant Marco would do whatever it took to contain it. Elena pulled out her phone and called Victor Reyes. I'm hiring you. Whatever your retainer is, I'll pay it. I need you to protect me and my baby from what's about to happen. What changed? Victor's voice was alert, despite the late hour. My sister is pregnant too, 10 weeks along. She's about to tell Marco. Victor was quiet for a moment. That's a complication. That's an understatement. It also gives us leverage. Marco can't afford for this to become public. 2 babies, 2 sisters, all the implications of divided loyalty and succession issues. He'll want to settle with you quickly and generously to keep you quiet. I don't want his money. Yes, you do. You want enough money to disappear, if you need to raise your child safely away from all this mess. You want financial independence that he can't touch or control. Victor's tone turned sharp. Don't confuse emotional satisfaction with practical strategy, Elena. You take everything you can get from him, and you use it to build a life where his choices can't destroy you. He was right. Elena hated that he was right, but he was. When can we meet to start documenting everything? Tomorrow. And Elena, don't go back to that penthouse. Don't be alone with Marco until we've established terms. Men like him get desperate, and desperate men make dangerous choices. After they hung up, Elena walked through the studio, turning on every light, trying to chase away the shadows that felt like they were closing in. She thought about calling Sarah, asking if the stress of all this was really going to hurt the baby, but she already knew the answer. Of course, it was. Stress, fear, rage, all of it flooding her system with cortisol and adrenaline, all of it reaching the tiny life growing inside her. But what choice did she have? Ignore Livia's pregnancy. Pretend Marco hadn't betrayed her, accept whatever settlement he offered, and slink away quietly. No, she'd spent 24 years accepting what she was given, making the best of circumstances she hadn't chosen. And look where that had gotten her. Elena pulled out her sketchpad again, but this time she didn't make lists. Instead, she started drawing. Harsh lines and sharp angles, faces twisted in anguish and rage, figures trapped in frames that crushed them smaller and smaller. She drew until her hand cramped, until the studio was full of discarded images of her anger and fear and grief. And somewhere in that cathartic purging, she started to feel something that might have been power. Because Marco had made a terrible mistake. He'd underestimated her, assumed that betrayal would break her into someone small and manageable. He'd forgotten that she'd survived worse than this. Losing her mother, raising her sister alone, sacrificing her dreams to save her family. She was stronger than he remembered, maybe stronger than she'd remembered too. Elena gathered up the drawings and spread them across her old work table, studying them like evidence. Each one showed a different facet of what she was feeling, but together they told a story she was starting to understand. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. She picked up her phone one more time, scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Carmine Valente answered on the second ring. Elena, I'm glad you called. Tell Marco I'll meet with him day after tomorrow, 2 p.m., at my attorney's office. He can bring whoever he wants, but this conversation happens on my terms, in my space, with my representation. He's going to want to talk to you before then to explain. I don't care what he wants. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. Carmine was quiet for a moment. You sound different. I am different. Tell Marco that too. Elena ended the call, feeling something fierce and bright burning in her chest. She had 2 days to prepare, 2 days to document everything she knew, to build her case, to transform from victim into strategist. It wasn't enough time, but it would have to be, because Elena Voss Duca was done being the woman everyone expected her to be, and she was about to show her husband exactly what kind of woman betrayal had created. The 2 days before the meeting passed in a blur of documentation and discovery. Victor Reyes arrived at the studio the next morning with a paralegal and enough recording equipment to wire a small building. Elena spent hours walking them through everything she knew. Bank accounts, shell corporations, the names of men who came to the penthouse for late-night meetings, the offshore investments Marco thought were hidden. Victor said, impressed, "You've been paying attention," as Elena listed properties held under corporations with innocuous names. Most wives in your position claim ignorance. I'm not most wives. Elena poured herself another glass of water, her third in an hour. The nausea was constant now, made worse by stress and lack of sleep. I knew what I was marrying into. I just chose not to look too closely at the details. Why the change? Because ignorance was a luxury I could afford when I was just his wife. Now I'm a mother protecting my child. That requires different choices. Victor's paralegal, a severe woman named Patricia, who'd barely spoken, looked up from her laptop. There's a significant transfer that happened yesterday. 3 million moved from one of Duca's primary accounts into an offshore holding. Hiding assets before settlement negotiations, Victor said. Classic move. We'll need to document everything we can find before he relocates more. Elena thought about the filing cabinet in Marco's study at the penthouse, the one he thought she didn't know about behind the false panel. I can get you documentation, real documentation, but I need to go back to the apartment when he's not there. Victor said immediately, absolutely not. You go back there, you're vulnerable. He could claim you're stealing, have you arrested, use it against you. He won't have me arrested. That would draw too much attention. You don't know what he'll do when he's cornered. And right now, with 2 pregnancies in play and his reputation on the line, Marco Duca is cornered. Victor closed his tablet. We work with what we have. It's enough to establish that you're not going to be bullied into a bad settlement. But Elena couldn't stop thinking about that filing cabinet, about the ledgers Marco kept there, the records that would prove exactly where his money came from and where it went. Information like that wasn't just leverage. It was ammunition. That night, after Victor and Patricia left, Elena called the one person who might help her without asking too many questions. Mrs. Duca. Carmine Valente sounded surprised to hear from her. Is everything all right? I need to get into the penthouse tomorrow morning early before Marco wakes up. I need you to make sure he's not there. Silence on the other end, then carefully, what are you planning? Nothing that concerns you. I just need access to my own home without having to see my husband. Marco's been asking about you. He's worried. Marco can save his concern for his pregnant mistress. Elena kept her voice level. Can you help me or not? Another pause. He has a meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. across town. It should take at least 2 hours. I can make sure it runs long if needed. Thank you. Carmen's voice dropped lower. Elena, whatever you're doing, be careful. Marco's not himself right now. The situation with your sister has him rattled, and men in his position don't handle vulnerability well. Is that a threat? It's a warning from someone who's known you long enough to not want to see you get hurt. Elena hung up, her heart pounding. She knew going back to the penthouse was risky, but the potential payoff was worth it. If she could get those documents, she'd have proof of things Marco couldn't afford to have exposed. Real power, not just the threat of scandal. She barely slept that night, kept awake by nausea and anxiety, and the constant awareness of her phone lighting up with messages she refused to read. Livia had sent 17 texts since Elena blocked her, all coming through as notifications from blocked numbers. Marco had sent 12, each one progressively more desperate. At 7 the next morning, Elena drove to the penthouse building. The doorman looked surprised to see her, but said nothing as he held the door. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless, her stomach churning with every ascending number. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, cold and pristine, and utterly empty of anything resembling warmth. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floors as she moved through rooms that had never felt like home, heading straight for Marco's study. The filing cabinet was behind a false panel that released with pressure in exactly the right spot. Elena had discovered it by accident 2 years ago, had spent an hour copying everything inside before carefully replacing it all. She told herself she was just being prepared, just protecting herself in case she ever needed leverage. Now she was grateful for that paranoia. The ledgers were still there, along with contracts and correspondence that painted a detailed picture of Marco's empire. Elena photographed everything with her phone, her hands shaking so badly some of the images came out blurred. She had to stop twice when waves of nausea hit, breathing through her mouth until the room stopped spinning. She was replacing the last ledger when she heard the elevator chime. Her heart stopped. Marco wasn't supposed to be back for another hour at least, but heavy footsteps were crossing the living room, heading toward the study, and there was nowhere to hide. Elena stepped away from the filing cabinet, willing her hands to stop shaking, and turned to face the door just as Marco walked in. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot and haunted. He stopped when he saw her, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Elena, thank Christ. I've been trying to reach you. What are you doing here?" She kept her voice steady. "You're supposed to be in a meeting. Carmine called and said you needed to get into the apartment. I told him to cancel my meeting." Marco stepped into the study, and Elena fought the urge to back away. "I wanted to see you, to talk to you before tomorrow. We have nothing to talk about until my attorney is present. Please, just 5 minutes. Just you and me like it used to be. It was never just you and me, Marco. It was always a transaction. I just didn't understand the full terms." He flinched. "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk to me about fair?" Elena felt rage rising, but pushed it down. Getting emotional now would only weaken her position. "I came here to get some of my things. Then I'm leaving. Your things from my filing cabinet." His eyes went to the false panel, still slightly ajar. "What were you looking for, Elena?" "Documentation, evidence. The kind of thing a wife needs when her husband is about to try to screw her in a divorce settlement." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "I would never. I know you don't believe me, but I want this to be fair. I want you to have everything you need. Everything except honesty, except loyalty, except the basic respect of not sleeping with my sister." Elena's voice cracked despite her best efforts. "How long were you planning to keep it going, Marco? How long would you have let me think we had a real marriage? We did have a real marriage. We still do. We have a legal contract. That's all we've ever had." Marco moved closer, and she saw real anguish in his face. "That's not true. I know I fucked up. I know what I did is unforgivable. But, Elena, we built a life together. That has to mean something. It meant something to me. Clearly, it didn't mean the same thing to you. I was weak." He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could smell the bourbon on his breath. "Livia came to me one night after you'd gone to bed. She told me she'd always wanted me, that she could make me happy in ways you couldn't. And I was angry at you." "Angry at me?" Elena's voice rose. "For what? For failing to get pregnant? For getting older? For being the wife you chose?" The words exploded out of him. "For not loving me. For 24 years you've been perfectly pleasant, perfectly beautiful, perfectly everything a wife should be, except in love with me. And I thought I could live with that. I thought it didn't matter. But then Livia looked at me like I hung the fucking moon. And I wanted that. I wanted someone to choose me, not just accept me as part of a deal." Elena stared at him, processing this confession. "So you punished me for a marriage you engineered?" "I was 23 years old, Marco. My father owed you money we couldn't pay. You came to our house and offered to clear the debt if I married you. Where exactly in that transaction was I supposed to fall in love? You could have tried. You could have at least pretended." "I did pretend. I pretended for 2 decades that I was happy, that I was grateful, that I didn't resent every single choice that led me to you." Elena felt tears burning, but refused to let them fall. "And the one time I actually started feeling something real, when I got pregnant, when I thought maybe we could build something genuine around this baby, I found you inside my sister." Marco's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so goddamn sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. I know, but I'm trying to make it right. The meeting tomorrow. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement. The penthouse, half my legitimate holdings, a trust fund for the baby that I can't touch. You'll never have to worry about money again. And in exchange, discretion, a quiet divorce, no media, no drama. We tell people we grew apart, that it was mutual and amicable. You get your freedom and your security. I keep my reputation intact. What about Livia?" Something dark crossed his face. "Livia is a complication I'm still figuring out how to handle. She's pregnant. Did she tell you?" Marco went very still. What? 10 weeks? Your baby? Or did you think you could sleep with two sisters without consequences? Elena watched him process this new devastation and felt a savage satisfaction in his shock. So now you have two pregnant women to deal with, Marco. Two babies on the way. Two mothers who are going to want things from you. How are you planning to make that right? His voice was hollow. She can't be pregnant. She was on birth control. Apparently not effectively. Or maybe she wanted this. Maybe she thought getting pregnant would force your hand, make you leave me and choose her. Marco sank into his desk chair, his head in his hands. Jesus Christ, this can't be happening, but it is. And now you have to figure out how to manage two women, two babies, and the scandal that's going to erupt when people find out. Elena moved toward the door. Good luck with that. He looked up and she saw real fear in his eyes. Wait, you can't tell anyone about Livia's pregnancy. Not yet. I need time to handle this. Handle it how? Make it disappear? Pay her off? Convince her to get rid of it? I don't know. I need time to think. You should have thought before you fucked my sister multiple times for 6 months. Elena pulled out her phone, showed him the screen full of photographs. I have copies of everything in your filing cabinet, Marco. Every ledger, every contract, every piece of evidence that shows where your money really comes from. And if you try to screw me in this divorce, if you try to take my baby or limit my resources or do anything, except give me exactly what I deserve, I will burn your entire empire to the ground. The threat hung between them. Marco stared at the phone, then at her, and she saw the moment he understood that she wasn't bluffing. He said you wouldn't, but there was no conviction in it. Try me. I've spent 24 years being the good wife who doesn't ask questions, who doesn't rock the boat, who accepts what she's given. That woman is gone, Marco. You killed her when you betrayed me. And what's rising in her place is someone who will do whatever it takes to protect her child. Our child? My child. You lost the right to claim ownership when you chose my sister over our marriage. Elena moved to the door, then stopped. One more thing. I want the house on Blackwell Heights, the one that belonged to my family. You can keep this cold marble mausoleum, but that house is mine. Those are my terms, Elena. The house, half your legitimate assets, the trust fund you mentioned, and complete discretion about the circumstances of our divorce. You give me that, and I keep quiet about everything I know. You fight me, and I make sure every detail of your operation ends up in the right hands. His voice went cold. You're threatening to turn informant. You understand what happens to people who talk to the authorities about me? Elena met his eyes steadily. Is that a threat, Marco? Are you threatening the mother of your child? Because if you are, I should mention that I've already made copies of everything. They're with my attorney, with instructions to release them if anything happens to me. So, if you're thinking about handling me the way you handle other problems, you might want to reconsider. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the wreckage of everything they'd built together. Finally, Marco spoke. I never wanted it to end like this. Neither did I. But you made your choices, and now we both have to live with them. Elena walked out of the study, through the apartment that had never been a home, and didn't look back. She made it to her car before the shaking started, adrenaline and fear flooding her system. She'd just threatened a crime boss, a man who'd built his empire on violence and intimidation, a man who had the resources and connections to make people disappear. But she'd also just seen his fear, his desperation, the recognition that she held power he couldn't simply take back. Elena drove back to the studio, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. She had one day before the meeting with Marco and their attorneys, one day to prepare for a confrontation that would determine the rest of her life. She spent it reviewing everything with Victor, going over strategy and contingencies. He was pleased with the documentation she'd obtained, less pleased that she'd confronted Marco directly. His voice tight with controlled anger, he said, "You could have gotten hurt. Men like Duca don't respond well to being backed into corners. I had to let him know I wasn't going to be pushed around, that I have leverage, and I'm willing to use it. That's my job. Your job is to stay safe and protect that baby. I can do both." Victor looked at her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected, Mrs. Duca. Most women in your position are so beaten down by fear and manipulation that they can barely function." Elena finished. "But you're angry. I'm so angry I can barely think straight. And I'm using that anger to fuel every move I make. Just make sure it doesn't make you reckless. Anger is powerful, but it's also dangerous." That night, Elena lay awake in the studio, one hand on her stomach, trying to feel the life growing there. It was too early for movement, but she imagined she could sense something. A flutter, a whisper, a promise that made all of this worth it. Her phone buzzed with another message from Livia, this one getting through despite the block. It was just 2 words. I'm sorry. Elena deleted it without responding. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry couldn't undo the betrayal or rebuild the trust or make any of this hurt less. But as she lay there in the darkness, she thought about Livia's baby, her niece or nephew, growing in her sister's body, innocent of the circumstances that created it. A child who would be her own child's half-sibling, connected by blood and Marco's choices. The complexity of it made her head hurt. But beneath the anger and betrayal, Elena recognized something else, a fierce protective instinct that extended beyond just her own child. Because Livia's baby didn't ask for this mess any more than Elena's did. She fell asleep thinking about families and blood and the impossible tangle of love and hate that bound people together even when they should run. And when she dreamed, it was of 2 babies reaching for each other across a divide their parents had created, too young to understand why they were kept apart. Morning came too soon. Elena woke feeling worse than she had in days. Nausea so intense she couldn't keep down even water. A headache that made light painful. Exhaustion so deep she could barely lift her head. She called Dr. Chen, who insisted on seeing her immediately, who took one look at her and checked her blood pressure twice because the first reading seemed too high to be accurate. Sarah said bluntly, "You're not taking care of yourself. Your pressure is dangerously elevated. You're dehydrated, and you're showing signs of extreme stress response, Elena. This is exactly what I warned you about. I have a meeting in 3 hours that will determine my entire future. I can't fall apart now. You're not falling apart. Your body is telling you it can't sustain this level of crisis." Sarah pulled out her prescription pad. "I'm putting you on modified bed, rest effective immediately. That means no stress, no confrontations, no meetings with your soon-to-be ex-husband. I can't miss this meeting. You can and you will, because the alternative is potentially losing this baby, and I know you won't risk that." The words hit Elena like cold water. Lose the baby. The one thing she'd wanted for 17 years, the miracle she'd given up on, now threatened by the very thing she was doing to protect it. She said quietly, "I'll reschedule. Tell Marco it has to wait." But when she called Victor to cancel, he had different news. "Don't bother. Marco's attorney just called. He's requesting we postpone for a week. Apparently, something's come up that requires his immediate attention. What kind of something? He didn't say. But reading between the lines, I'd guess it has to do with your sister's pregnancy." Maybe she told him. Maybe he's dealing with the fallout. Either way, it buys you time to recover. Elena ended the call and let Sarah admit her for observation, hooking her up to IV fluids and fetal monitors while she lay in a hospital bed, feeling her body slowly stabilize. The baby's heartbeat filled the room, strong, steady, completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding its existence. Sarah pointed to the monitor. "Healthy. Despite everything you're putting yourself through, this baby is fighting to stay with you. Don't make it fight harder than it has to." Elena spent 2 days in the hospital, forced into stillness and quiet. No phone calls allowed except to her attorney. And in that enforced peace, something shifted. The rage that had been driving her didn't disappear, but it transformed into something colder, more focused. She'd been so consumed with hurting Marco back, with making him pay for his betrayal, that she'd lost sight of what actually mattered. Not revenge, not punishment, not even justice, really. Just safety, security, a life where her child could grow up, protected from the ugliness that created it. When Sarah finally discharged her with strict orders for continued rest, Elena went back to the studio with a new clarity. She called Victor and told him to accept whatever Marco offered, as long as it included the house, enough money for real independence, and full custody with no visitation restrictions. Victor sounded surprised. "You're sure? We could push for more. We have leverage, I'm sure. I don't want to spend the next year fighting him. I want to spend it preparing for my baby." "What about your sister? What about the scandal? That's Marco's problem to manage, not mine." Elena looked around the studio, at the space that had become her refuge. "I'm done letting his choices dictate my life. I'm taking what I need and walking away. That's very mature of you." "It's not maturity, it's survival." Elena pressed her hand against her stomach. "I have more important things to fight for now." The meeting, when it finally happened a week later, was anticlimactic. Marco looked worse than Elena had ever seen him. Gray-faced, hollow-eyed, moving like every gesture cost him something. He agreed to her terms without argument, signed the papers his attorney put in front of him, and barely looked at her throughout the entire process. Only at the end, as they were leaving, did he stop her. He said quietly, "Livia lost the baby 3 days ago. Miscarriage." Elena felt the news hit her like a punch. Whatever she felt about her sister, whatever anger and betrayal still burned, this was a loss. A grief she understood intimately. She said, "I'm sorry," and she meant it. Marco's voice was hollow. She's blaming herself, saying it's punishment for what she did to you. "I don't know how to help her. That's not my problem anymore, Marco." "I know. I just thought you should know." He turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I hope your baby is healthy. I hope you find whatever happiness you're looking for." "I'm not looking for happiness. I'm looking for peace." "There's a difference." She walked out of the attorney's office, a soon-to-be divorced woman, papers signed and filed, one part of her life officially over. But the relief she expected didn't come. Instead, she felt a strange emptiness, like she'd been carrying something heavy for so long, that without it, she didn't quite know how to stand. Elena drove back to the studio and sat in the silence, one hand on her growing stomach, trying to figure out what came next. She had the house, the money, the freedom she demanded. She had a baby on the way, and a future that was finally hers to choose. So why did she feel so lost? The emptiness lasted 3 days before it transformed into something else entirely. Elena was sorting through boxes in the studio, deciding what to move to the Blackwell Heights house, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "Mrs. Duca. My name is Detective Rachel Morrison. I'm with the Organized Crime Division. I was hoping we could talk." Elena's blood went cold. "About what?" "Your husband. Ex-husband, I should say. The paperwork came through yesterday. We've been building a case against Marco Duca for the past 18 months, and we believe you might have information that could help us." "I have nothing to say to you. I understand you're in a difficult position, but Mrs. Duca, Elena, we know about the documents you took from his filing cabinet. We know you photographed evidence that could put him away for 20 years. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. "How do you know that?" "We've had surveillance on your husband for months. We saw you enter the penthouse, saw how long you were in his study, and we know that Victor Reyes, the attorney you hired, has connections to several organizations who would very much like to see Marco Duca's empire dismantled." "Are you suggesting my attorney is working with you?" "I'm suggesting that you've stumbled into the middle of something much bigger than a divorce, and I'm offering you a chance to do the right thing before you get pulled under by it." Elena ended the call without responding, her heart racing. She immediately dialed Victor, who answered on the first ring. "Did you set me up?" she demanded. "Did you feed information to the police?" "What are you talking about?" "A detective just called me. Rachel Morrison. She knows about the documents, knows I photographed Marco's records. She seems to think I'm going to cooperate with their investigation." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't give them anything." "But, Elena, you need to understand something. The moment you took those photographs, the moment you threatened Marco with exposure, you put yourself on law enforcement's radar. They've been watching him for months, and they watch everyone in his orbit. So what do I do? Nothing. You say nothing. You give them nothing. You cooperate with nothing. Those documents were obtained during a divorce proceeding. They're protected under attorney-client privilege. But if you voluntarily hand them over to the police, that protection disappears. And if they subpoena me, then we fight the subpoena. But Elena, there's something you need to consider. If the police are this close to making a case against Marco, if they're this desperate for evidence, then Marco's position is more vulnerable than we thought, which means he's more dangerous." After Victor hung up, Elena sat in the studio's silence, trying to process this new complication. She'd thought signing the divorce papers meant the end of her entanglement with Marco's world. She'd thought taking the settlement and walking away meant freedom. But freedom, apparently, wasn't that simple. She was still sitting there an hour later when someone knocked on the studio door. Elena looked through the peephole and saw Carmine Valente standing in the hallway alone, his hands visible and empty. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. He said immediately, "I'm not armed. I'm not here to threaten you or intimidate you. I'm here because Marco doesn't know. I'm here, and what I need to tell you is too important to trust to a phone call. Then talk fast." Carmine stepped inside, his eyes scanning the studio with professional assessment. The police contacted you today. Detective Morrison, Organized Crime Division. How did you know? Because they contacted 3 other people in Marco's organization this week. They're making their move, Elena. Whatever case they've been building, they're ready to act on it. And they think you're their way in. I'm not giving them anything. I believe you. But there are people in Marco's world who won't. There are people who think you're a liability, that you know too much and care too little about the consequences of talking. Carmine moved closer, his voice dropping. I need you to understand something. I've known Marco for 15 years. I've helped him build his empire. I've buried his secrets. I've done things I'm not proud of to protect his interests. But I've also watched him destroy everything good in his life because he couldn't stop taking what he wanted. Why are you telling me this? Because you're pregnant with his child, and that baby deserves to have a mother who's still breathing when it's born. Carmine pulled out a phone. Not his regular one, Elena noticed, but a cheap burner. There's a faction within the organization that wants Marco gone. They think his affair with your sister, the scandal, the divorce, all of it makes him weak, makes him vulnerable to exactly the kind of pressure the police are applying. What faction? The one led by Marco's cousin, Nico Duca. He's been waiting for an opportunity like this for years, and now he has it. He's going to use the police investigation as cover to make his move. Elena felt ice spreading through her chest. Make his move how? However he needs to. But Elena, if Marco goes down, whether it's to the police or to Nico, there's going to be fallout. People are going to look for someone to blame, and you're a very convenient target. So, what am I supposed to do? Carmine handed her the burner phone. Keep this on you at all times. If anything happens, if you feel threatened or unsafe, you call the number programmed into it. No questions asked. Immediate extraction to somewhere safe. Why would you help me? You're Marco's right hand. I'm Marco's consigliere, which means my job is to protect the family's interests, not just Marco's ego. And right now, the family's interests include making sure his pregnant ex-wife doesn't end up dead in a ditch somewhere. Carmine moved toward the door. One more thing. Livia's been asking about you. Elena's stomach clenched. I have nothing to say to her. She's in bad shape. The miscarriage, the guilt, Marco cutting her off, it's destroying her. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm just telling you that your sister is spiraling, and if something happens to her, you're going to have to live with not trying to stop it. After he left, Elena stared at the burner phone in her hand, trying to figure out what game Carmine was playing. Was he genuinely trying to protect her, or was this some elaborate setup to make her trust him so he could manipulate her later? She didn't have time to decide. Her regular phone rang. Dr. Chen's office calling to remind her of her appointment tomorrow. The baby. In all the chaos and paranoia and fear, she'd almost forgotten that there was still a life growing inside her that needed her attention and care. Elena spent the rest of the day trying to focus on practical things. She packed more boxes, made lists of what the house would need, researched pediatricians and birthing centers. Normal things, the kind of planning any pregnant woman would do. But underneath the normality, fear hummed like a live wire. Because Carmine was right, she was vulnerable now in ways she hadn't been as Marco's wife. Then she'd been protected by her position, by the implicit threat that harming her would bring consequences. Now, she was just a woman who knew too much, who'd taken evidence that could destroy powerful people, who represented a loose end that needed tying up. That night, she dreamed of running through the Blackwell Heights mansion, searching for something she'd lost, hearing footsteps behind her getting closer. She woke gasping, her hand pressed to her stomach, the baby kicking for the first time. A flutter so faint she might have imagined it, but real enough to ground her in what mattered. The appointment with Dr. Chen the next morning was routine until it wasn't. Sarah did the ultrasound herself, her face carefully neutral as she moved the wand across Elena's swollen belly. Is something wrong? Elena asked, hearing the fear in her own voice. No, everything looks good. Heartbeat is strong. Growth is appropriate for gestational age. Sarah paused. But I'm concerned about your stress levels. Your blood pressure is still elevated, and I can see tension in your body that wasn't there before. What's going on? Elena almost told her everything. The detective's call, Carmine's warning, the constant fear that had become her new baseline. But what could Sarah do? She was a doctor, not a bodyguard or a lawyer or whatever Elena actually needed right now. She said, instead, just adjusting to the divorce. It's harder than I expected. Have you considered therapy? Someone who specializes in trauma and major life transitions. I'll think about it. After the appointment, Elena drove to the Blackwell Heights house for the first time since Christmas Eve. The mansion looked exactly the same, beautiful and cold, full of memories that cut both ways. She walked through rooms that had once held her childhood, tried to imagine filling them with new life, new purpose. The bedroom where she'd found Marco and Livia was still exactly as she'd left it. Someone had made the bed, but otherwise nothing had changed. Elena stood in the doorway, feeling the ghost of that moment wash over her. Then she pulled out her phone and called a contractor. By the end of the week, that room would be gutted and rebuilt. New walls, new floor, new everything. She would burn the memory out with renovation, transform the space into something that held no trace of betrayal. She was walking back downstairs when her phone rang. The burner phone Carmine had given her. Elena stared at it, her heart pounding, then answered. Carmine's voice was tight. There's a car outside your house. Silver sedan. 2 men inside. They're not ours. Elena moved to the window, peered through the curtains. Sure enough, a silver sedan was parked across the street. 2 figures visible in the front seat. Who are they? I don't know. Could be police surveillance. Could be Nico's people. Could be someone else entirely. But you need to leave now. Don't pack anything. Don't stop to lock up. Just get in your car and drive. Drive where? Anywhere. Just keep moving until I call you back and tell you it's safe. Elena grabbed her purse and moved toward the garage, her legs shaking. She got in her car, started the engine, and pulled out onto the street, forcing herself not to look at the silver sedan as she passed. It followed her. Elena's hands tightened on the wheel. She wasn't a trained driver, didn't know how to lose a tail or execute evasive maneuvers. She just drove, taking random turns, heading for the more populated areas where witnesses and cameras might offer some protection. The sedan stayed with her for 15 minutes before peeling off suddenly, disappearing down a side street. Elena kept driving anyway, not trusting that they were really gone until the burner phone rang again. Carmine said they left. You can stop now. Who were they? Police. Plainclothes surveillance. They were just tracking your movements, not planning to approach. How do you know? Because one of them is on our payroll. He called to let me know they'd been ordered to follow you. See if you led them anywhere interesting. Elena pulled into a grocery store parking lot and sat there trying to catch her breath. This is insane. I signed the divorce papers. I walked away. Why won't everyone just leave me alone? Because you're connected to Marco and everyone wants a piece of him right now. The police want to arrest him. Nico wants to replace him. And Marco himself is trying to hold on to power while his world falls apart. Carmen paused. You need protection, Elena. Real protection. I can arrange it, but you'd have to trust me. I don't trust anyone. Smart. But you're 7 months pregnant, and people are following you. At some point, survival requires accepting help from imperfect sources. Elena closed her eyes. What kind of protection? Private security. Former military, vetted and paid enough that they can't be bought. They stay with you 24/7 until after the baby is born and things settle down. And what do you get out of this? The satisfaction of knowing I didn't let a pregnant woman get hurt because of her husband's choices. His voice softened. I have daughters, Elena. If they were in your position, I'd want someone to help them, even if they didn't trust me. Against every instinct, screaming at her to refuse, Elena heard herself say, okay, but I'm paying for it myself. I don't want Marco's money anywhere near this. Fair enough. I'll have someone at your studio within the hour. The security team arrived in 90 minutes, 2 men and a woman, all carrying themselves with the kind of controlled readiness that spoke of extensive training. The woman who introduced herself as Jennifer Ross did most of the talking. We've swept your studio for surveillance devices and found 3. Remove them all. We'll do the same at your house before you move in. Jennifer's voice was professionally neutral. Our job is to keep you safe until you don't need us anymore. That means we're with you everywhere. Shopping, doctor's appointments, all of it. It's going to feel invasive, but it's necessary. Elena asked, her voice hollow. Who planted the devices? Can't say for certain, but the tech is law enforcement grade, so probably Detective Morrison's team. The knowledge that the police had been listening to her private conversations made Elena feel violated in a whole new way. She thought walking away from Marco meant reclaiming her privacy, her autonomy. Instead, she'd just traded one form of surveillance for another. She spent the next week in a strange liminal space, trapped in the studio with her security team, afraid to go anywhere, watching the world through windows that suddenly felt like barriers instead of connections. Her phone rang constantly. Victor with legal updates, Dr. Chen with appointment reminders, blocked numbers that could have been Livia or Marco or anyone else from her old life. She answered none of them. She just existed, waiting for whatever was coming next. It came on a Tuesday morning when Jennifer knocked on the studio door with unusual urgency. "Turn on the news," she said, Channel 7. Elena found the remote, switched on the small TV she barely used. The screen filled with footage of Marco being led out of the penthouse in handcuffs, federal agents swarming the building, reporters shouting questions he ignored. The anchor said, her voice professionally grave, "Federal raid executed early this morning on the residence of suspected organized crime figure Marco Duca. Duca, 51, is being charged with racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder in connection with a federal investigation spanning 18 months. Authorities say this is one of the largest operations against organized crime in the city's history." Elena watched her husband, ex-husband, being pushed into a federal vehicle and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, not even relief. Just a strange emptiness where something should have been. Her phone rang immediately, Victor calling, probably to make sure she understood that she could still be subpoenaed, that the divorce settlement might be frozen if Marco's assets were seized, that her life was about to get even more complicated. She didn't answer. Instead, she called the one person she'd been avoiding for weeks. Livia's voice was rough, like she'd been crying or drinking or both. "Lena, is that really you?" "It's me. I saw the news about Marco. Are you okay?" "No, but I'm safe and the baby's safe, and that's all that matters right now." Elena took a breath. "Livia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Anything. Did you know about the police investigation? About what Marco was really involved in? Were you feeding information to anyone?" Silence on the other end, long enough that Elena knew the answer before Livia spoke. Livia said finally, "There was a man. He approached me about 8 months ago. Said he was interested in Marco's business. Wanted to know if I could get him information. I thought he was a potential investor or partner. I didn't know he was building a case. What did you tell him?" "Everything I knew, which wasn't much. Marco never really talked business with me, but I told him about the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the meetings with people whose names I wasn't supposed to remember." Livia's voice broke. "Lena, I swear I didn't know what it was for. I thought I was helping Marco expand his empire, not helping the police destroy it." Elena closed her eyes. "You were sleeping with him while feeding information to his enemies. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" I know now. But at the time, I wanted to be useful to him. I wanted him to see me as more than just a mistress. And this man, he made it sound like I was doing Marco a favor, helping him identify potential allies. I don't know his real name. He called himself James. We met in coffee shops, always different ones. He paid me cash for information. A pause. The last time I saw him was 3 weeks ago. He asked me if you'd taken anything from Marco's office. I told him I didn't know, but he seemed to think you had. Elena felt ice spreading through her veins. "Did you tell Marco about this man?" "No. I was afraid if he found out I'd been talking to someone about his business, he'd cut me off. And after I got pregnant, I needed him more than ever." Livia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Lena. I've destroyed everything. My relationship with you, my baby, Marco's life, all of it. Because I couldn't stop wanting what wasn't mine. I can't forgive you. Not now. Maybe not ever. But Livia, you need to tell the police about this man. If he was using you to build a case, they need to know. And if I do, what happens to me? I don't know. But lying to federal investigators is a crime. And if they find out you withheld information, it's going to be worse than coming forward voluntarily." After she hung up, Elena sat with the implications of what Livia had revealed. Her sister had been an informant, knowingly or not, which meant Marco's arrest wasn't just about the police investigation. It was also about Livia's betrayal, about information she'd given that led them straight to him. The irony was almost too much. Marco had betrayed Elena with Livia. Livia had betrayed Marco with information, and now all three of them were dealing with the consequences of choices made in weakness and want. Elena's security team insisted on moving her to the Blackwell Heights house that afternoon, despite the renovations still being ongoing. Jennifer explained it's more defensible. Better sight lines, more escape routes if needed, and with Marco in custody, anyone who wants to target you will look for you at your known locations first. So Elena packed up the studio one final time, taking everything that mattered and leaving the rest behind. As they drove to the mansion, she saw news helicopters circling the penthouse building. Reporters camped outside, the whole spectacle of Marco's downfall, playing out in real time. She thought about calling him, maybe visiting him in custody. But what would she say? "I'm sorry, your empire is crumbling. I hope you survive prison. Good luck with the murder charges." No, whatever connection they'd once had was severed completely now. He was on his path, she was on hers, and the only thing still linking them was the child growing inside her who would never know his father as anything but a cautionary tale. The house felt different with security present, with people moving through rooms, checking locks and sightlines and emergency exits. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress, which maybe was exactly what Elena needed right now. That night, alone in the master bedroom, not the one she'd found Marco in, but a different one on the opposite side of the house, Elena felt the baby kick hard enough to take her breath away. She pressed her hand to the spot, felt the life inside her pushing back, demanding acknowledgement. She whispered, I know you're there. I know you're counting on me." And in that moment, Elena made a decision. She was done being reactive, done letting other people's choices dictate her survival. Marco was in custody. Livia was spiraling, the police were circling, and Nico was probably planning his next move. But Elena had something none of them had. She had evidence, real evidence, documented and copied and safely stored. Evidence that could destroy what was left of Marco's organization, or protect it, depending on how she chose to use it. For the first time since Christmas Eve, Elena felt something that resembled power. Not the borrowed power of being Marco's wife, but her own agency, earned through pain and betrayal, and the stubborn refusal to let any of it break her. She picked up her phone and called Victor. "I want to meet with Detective Morrison on my terms, in my space, with you present, and I want immunity for anything I'm about to tell her." Victor asked if she was sure about this. "No, but I'm done being afraid. It's time to end this on my terms, instead of everyone else's." Detective Rachel Morrison arrived at the Blackwell Heights mansion 2 days later, flanked by a federal prosecutor named David Chen and enough recording equipment to document a confession. Elena watched them from the upstairs window as Jennifer's security team checked their credentials, then led them through the metal detectors that had been installed at every entrance. Victor said quietly, "You don't have to do this." He'd been saying variations of the same thing since she'd called him. Whatever immunity they're offering, it comes with strings. Once you cooperate, you're in their system. You become a witness, maybe even a target. I'm already a target. Elena pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling the baby shift. 8 months now, getting heavier every day, making everything from walking to breathing feel like effort. At least this way, I control the narrative. She descended the stairs slowly, Victor hovering like he expected her to fall. The pregnancy had become increasingly difficult in recent weeks. Her blood pressure still elevated despite medication, swelling in her hands and feet that made her rings cut into her flesh. Exhaustion so profound she sometimes fell asleep mid-conversation. Dr. Chen had mentioned the possibility of early induction if things got worse, maybe at 36 weeks instead of 40. The baby would be premature but viable, safer outside Elena's stressed body than inside it. But that was still 4 weeks away. 4 weeks to end this, to secure safety for her child, before it entered a world where its father was in federal custody and its mother was cooperating with the people prosecuting him. Detective Morrison stood when Elena entered the library, where Jennifer had set up the meeting. She was younger than Elena expected, mid-30s maybe, with sharp eyes, and a handshake that communicated both respect and assessment. "Mrs. Duca, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. It's Ms. Voss now. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago." Elena settled into the leather armchair that had been her father's and gestured for them to sit. "And I didn't agree to meet. I demanded it. There's a difference." Morrison smiled slightly. "Fair enough. Then let me be direct. We have Marco Duca on racketeering and money laundering, and we're building toward the conspiracy charges. But what we really need is someone who can testify to the operational structure of his organization. Someone who was there, who saw how decisions were made, who can connect dots we can only speculate about. You want me to testify against my ex-husband? We want you to tell the truth about what you witnessed during your marriage. If that truth happens to support our case, then yes, we'd like you to testify." Elena looked at the prosecutor, David Chen, who'd been silent so far. "And what do I get in exchange? Full immunity for any crimes you may have committed while married to Marco Duca." protection for you and your child, and the satisfaction of knowing you helped take down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the city. I don't care about satisfaction, I care about survival. Elena leaned forward as much as her pregnant belly would allow. I need guarantees, real ones, not just promises, because the moment I cooperate with you, I become a liability to people who make liability disappear. Morrison exchanged a glance with Chen, who nodded. We can offer witness protection, new identity, relocation, financial support until you're established somewhere else. I don't want to disappear. I want to stay in this house, in this city, and raise my child without constantly looking over my shoulder. Elena's voice was firm. So, unless you can guarantee Marco stays in prison for the rest of his life, and that his organization is dismantled so completely that nobody's left to come after me, witness protection is just delayed danger. Morrison admitted they can guarantee anything, but we can tell you that without your testimony, our case is strong but not airtight. With it, we can ensure Marco never sees daylight again. Elena thought about Marco in his cell, probably making calls through lawyers, probably orchestrating his defense and planning his revenge all at once. She thought about Carmine's warning, about Nico waiting in the wings, about all the violence and chaos that lived just beneath the surface of the life she'd inhabited for 24 years. She said, "Before I agree to anything, I need information. What about Livia, my sister?" She was feeding information to someone who claimed to be a business contact but was probably one of your people. Where does she stand in all this? Morrison's expression didn't change, but Elena saw the confirmation in her eyes. We can't discuss other witnesses or informants. So, she was an informant. Did she know what she was doing? I really can't. Detective. I'm 8 months pregnant and being followed by multiple parties who all want something from me. If you want my cooperation, you're going to have to give me something first. Starting with the truth about my sister's involvement. Chen spoke up. Your sister was approached by one of our undercover agents 8 months ago. He represented himself as a potential business partner, interested in legitimate ventures with organized crime connections. She provided information about Marco Duca's activities, but our assessment is that she genuinely didn't understand she was helping build a criminal case. So you used her. You manipulated a woman who was already making terrible choices, and you turned her into an unwitting informant. Morrison said, "We gathered intelligence from someone willing to provide it. That's our job. And now she's spiraling because she lost her baby and destroyed her relationship with Marco and betrayed her sister. And you don't care because you got what you needed." Elena felt anger rising, hot and sharp. That's my sister. Whatever she did, whatever mistake she made, she's still my family. Morrison said quietly, "Then help us make sure Marco can't hurt her either. Because Ms. Voss, your ex-husband knows about your sister's conversations with our agent. He knows she talked, even if she didn't realize what she was doing, and the only thing keeping her alive right now is that he's in custody and can't reach her." The words hit Elena like cold water. You're saying Marco would kill her? I'm saying that betrayal in his world has consequences. Your sister betrayed him with another man, then unknowingly helped the police build a case against him. That's not something people like Marco forgive. Elena's hand went to her stomach again, the baby kicking hard against her palm. She thought about Livia at 14, skinny and scared after their mother's funeral, clinging to Elena like she was the only solid thing left. She thought about raising her sister alone, sacrificing art school and dreams and any chance at a different life. She thought about finding Livia in bed with Marco, about the betrayal that had felt like dying. But underneath the anger and hurt, there was still something else. Something that recognized Livia as her blood, her responsibility, her problem to solve, even when she didn't want it to be. If I cooperate, I want immunity for Livia too. Elena said whatever she did or didn't do, she gets a pass. That's not how all this works. Then make it work, because I'm not sending my sister to prison while I walk free. We both made choices we regret. The difference is I'm the one with information you actually need. Morrison and Chen had a whispered conference. Finally, Morrison said, "We can probably make that happen, but your sister would have to agree to testify as well, and she'd need to be honest about what information she provided and when. I'll talk to her." Elena pulled out her phone, saw 17 missed calls from Livia over the past week. "But first, I need to know exactly what you want from me." They spent the next 3 hours going through it. Morrison wanted details about Marco's meetings, about the men who came to the penthouse, about conversations Elena had overheard and transactions she'd witnessed. She wanted the documents Elena had photographed, wanted them authenticated and entered into evidence. She wanted, essentially, for Elena to dismantle her ex-husband piece by piece. When exhaustion made it hard to concentrate, Elena finally said, "I need to think about this. I need to talk to my sister, and I need to understand what happens after Marco's convicted. Because sending him to prison doesn't eliminate his organization, it just creates a power vacuum." Morrison started to say that's not your concern, but Elena cut her off. "It absolutely is my concern, because whoever fills that vacuum is going to have opinions about the woman who put Marco away. And unless you're planning to find everyone in his organization simultaneously, somebody's going to be left standing who wants revenge." Chen said, "We're working on a comprehensive takedown. Marco's arrest was just the beginning. We have warrants being executed across the city, assets being seized, lieutenants being picked up. By the time we're done, there won't be enough of Duca's organization left to pose a threat. You're going after Carmine Valente." There's Morrison's eyes sharpened. "Why do you ask about Carmine specifically?" "Because he's the architect. Marco's the face, the power, the fear. But Carmine's the one who makes it all work. You take down Marco without taking down Carmine, and you've accomplished nothing. Carmine Valente is absolutely on our list, but he's been more careful than Marco. Harder to connect directly to criminal activity." Elena thought about the burner phone Carmine had given her, about his warnings and his protection, about the security team he'd arranged that was keeping her safe even now. She asked slowly, "What if I could give you Carmine?" Victor's hand landed on her arm. "Elena, think very carefully about what you're offering." "I am thinking carefully. I'm thinking that Carmine helped me when he didn't have to. But I'm also thinking that he's been enabling Marco's crimes for 15 years. And if taking him down means my child is safer, then that's what I'm willing to do." Morrison leaned forward. "What do you have on Carmine?" "Conversations. Details about operations he supervised. Enough to prove he wasn't just Marco's consigliere. He was an active participant in running the organization." Elena paused. "But I want something in exchange. I want guaranteed protection for my child. Not witness protection, not relocation. I want federal marshals on this property until everyone connected to Marco's organization is either in custody or neutralized. And I want that protection to extend to my sister. That's a significant commitment of resources, and I'm offering you the complete dismantling of a crime family that's operated with impunity for 2 decades. I'd say that's worth the resources." They negotiated for another hour before reaching terms everyone could live with. Elena would provide comprehensive testimony about Marco's operations and Carmine's role in them. She'd hand over the documents she'd photographed, and in exchange, she'd get immunity, protection, and the assurance that both she and Livia would be safe from retaliation. After Morrison and Chen left, Elena sat in the library silence, trying to process what she'd just agreed to. Victor paced in front of the fireplace, his face tight with concern. He said, "You've just made yourself the key witness in a major federal case. Do you understand what that means? The scrutiny, the pressure, the very real danger. I understand that I'm about to give birth to Marco Duca's child, and that child deserves a chance at a normal life. This is how I make that happen. By betraying everyone you've ever known. By choosing my child over people who made their own choices." Elena stood slowly, one hand on her lower back where pain had been building all day. Marco chose to build a criminal empire. Carmen chose to help him. Livia chose to betray me. I'm just choosing to survive their choices instead of being destroyed by them. That night, Elena called Livia for the first time since learning about Marco's arrest. Her sister answered on the first ring, her voice raw. "Lena." Elena said, "I need to see you tomorrow at the house. We need to talk about what happens next. I've been so scared. The police keep calling, and I don't know what to tell them, and Marco won't take my calls from custody." Elena's voice was firm. "Livia, stop talking. Don't say anything to anyone until we meet. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Okay. Tomorrow." Livia arrived the next morning looking like a ghost of herself. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her skin was sallow, her eyes hollow with grief and fear. When she saw Elena's pregnant belly, she made a sound that might have been a sob. "You're so big. The baby must be almost here. 4 weeks, if I make it that long." Elena gestured to the sitting room and kept her security team visible in the doorway. She wasn't taking chances, even with her sister. "We need to talk about the man you were giving information to. James, or whatever his real name was." Livia's face crumpled. I didn't know, Lena. I swear I thought I was helping Marco. I know, but you need to understand what you actually did. You helped the federal government build a case against him, and now they want you to testify about the information you provided. I can't. If Marco finds out I helped put him away, he already knows. The police told me he knows about your conversations with their agent, and the only reason you're still alive is because he's in custody and can't get to you. Olivia's face went white. He'd really kill me? After after I loved him. You didn't love him. You loved the idea of him, and he didn't love you either. You were just convenient. Elena kept her voice gentle despite the harsh truth. But Livia, I'm not letting him hurt you. I've made a deal with the prosecutors. You testify about what you told their agent. You get full immunity and protection. What kind of protection? The kind that comes from Marco and his entire organization being dismantled so thoroughly that nobody's left to come after us. Elena leaned forward. I'm testifying too. I'm giving them everything. The documents I took, the conversations I overheard, all of it. And between your information and mine, we're going to make sure Marco never gets out of prison. You'd really do that? After he betrayed you, you'd still destroy him? I'm not doing it to destroy him. I'm doing it to protect my child. There's a difference. Elena reached out, took her sister's hand. The gesture felt foreign after months of silence, but also necessary. You destroyed my trust, Livia. You broke something between us that might never heal. But you're still my sister, and I won't let you die because you made stupid choices while falling for the wrong man. Livia started crying, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. I'm so sorry. I've been so sorry every day since you found us. I lost my baby. I lost Marco. I lost you. I have nothing left. You have your life, and you have a choice about what you do with it. Elena squeezed her sister's hand. You can testify, help make sure Marco can't hurt anyone else, and then start over somewhere new. Or you can refuse and take your chances with whatever happens next. What would you do if you were me? Elena thought about the question about the impossible choices that had defined the last 8 months of her life. I'd testify. I'd tell the truth. And then I'd disappear somewhere far from all of this mess and try to build something real. They spent the next hour going through what Livia remembered telling the undercover agent. It wasn't much. Names and dates, observations about Marco's meetings, speculation about business deals she didn't fully understand. But combined with Elena's documentation, it painted a comprehensive picture of an organization built on violence and intimidation. After Livia left, Elena felt the baby kick hard enough to make her gasp. She pressed her hand to the spot, felt the fierce movement underneath. She whispered, I know this is a lot, but we're almost through it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of depositions and interviews. Elena sat for hours with prosecutors, walking them through 24 years of marriage to a man she'd never fully understood. She authenticated documents, explained organizational hierarchies, identified people in photographs that showed Marco meeting with men whose criminal enterprises spanned continents. And slowly, piece by piece, she watched the federal government build an airtight case against her ex-husband. Marco's attorney tried to arrange a meeting, claiming Marco wanted to talk to Elena about the baby, about future arrangements. Elena refused. There was nothing left to say between them except goodbye, and she could do that in a courtroom when she took the stand against him. Carmine was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Elena watched the news coverage showing him being led out of his townhouse in handcuffs, his face carefully blank. When her burner phone rang an hour later, she almost didn't answer. Carmine's voice was flat. You gave them me. After I protected you, after I tried to keep you safe, you gave them me. You protected Marco's interests, not me. You just thought keeping me safe served those interests. Elena kept her voice steady despite the guilt churning in her stomach. And yes, I gave them you because you enabled Marco's crimes for 15 years. And my child deserves to grow up in a world where people like you face consequences. That child is going to grow up without a father because of you. That child is going to grow up safe because of me. There's a difference. Elena ended the call, blocked the number, and tried to ignore the weight of what she'd done. She went into labor 3 days later, 2 weeks early, her water breaking at 3 in the morning. Dr. Chen met her at the hospital, Jennifer and her security team turning the maternity ward into a fortress. The labor was long and difficult, made worse by her elevated blood pressure and the stress of the last 8 months. Elena spent 18 hours in increasing pain, medications that only partially worked. medical staff hovering with concern she could read in their faces even when they tried to hide it. But at 9:43 p.m., she heard her son's first cry. They placed him on her chest immediately, small and wrinkled and perfect, his eyes squeezed shut, his tiny fists waving like he was already fighting the world. Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "He's healthy. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, all vitals strong." "You did it, Elena." Elena stared at the baby in her arms, this impossible miracle she'd waited 17 years to hold, and felt something break open in her chest. Not grief this time, but something that might have been hope. She whispered, touching his tiny hand. "Hi." He grabbed her finger immediately, his grip surprisingly strong. "Hi, baby. I'm your mom." She named him Alexander Thomas Voss, her last name, not Marco's. A new beginning unconnected to the empire that had defined her adult life. Marco's attorney filed motions, requesting visitation rights from custody. Elena's attorney filed counter motions arguing that a federal prisoner charged with multiple violent crimes presented an unacceptable risk. The judge sided with Elena, and Marco's rights were suspended pending the outcome of his trial. Elena brought Alexander home to the Blackwell Heights mansion when he was 3 days old. She'd had the nursery done in soft blues and greens, everything new and untainted by the past. Walking through the house with her son in her arms, she felt something shift. This wasn't her childhood home anymore. Wasn't the place where her father had gambled away their legacy, or where Marco had betrayed her with Livia. It was just a house, made of wood and stone and history that could be rewritten. She was rewriting it one room at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. Marco's trial began when Alexander was 6 weeks old. Elena testified on the 4th day, Victor and Jennifer flanking her as she walked into the federal courthouse. Marco sat at the defense table looking smaller than she remembered, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeat in his shoulders. Their eyes met once across the courtroom. Elena saw rage there, and betrayal, and something that might have been grief for everything they destroyed together. She looked away and told the truth, all of it. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Marco was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. At 51, it was effectively a life sentence. Elena watched the sentencing from the gallery, Alexander asleep in her arms, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet certainty that this chapter was finally, completely closed. Carmine took a plea deal, 20 years, in exchange for his testimony against other members of the organization. Nico Duca was arrested, trying to flee the country. The entire structure of Marco's empire collapsed within 6 months, leaving nothing but scattered remnants that posed no real threat. Livia took the witness protection offer, relocating to somewhere she wouldn't tell Elena, because knowing would make both of them vulnerable. They talked once before she left. Livia said, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even forgive myself. But Lena, I need you to know that I loved you. I still love you, even though I did everything possible to prove otherwise," Elena said. "I loved you too. Past tense. I don't know if I can get back to present tense. Maybe someday, but not now." "That's fair." Livia looked at Alexander sleeping in his carrier beside Elena's chair. "He's beautiful. He has your eyes. He has his own eyes." That's the point. They said goodbye outside the federal building, where Livia was meeting her handlers. Elena watched her sister walk away, small and alone, and felt the weight of their shared history settle around her shoulders like a coat she couldn't quite take off. But she didn't follow. She turned back to her car, to Alexander, to the life she was building from the wreckage of everything she'd lost. The first year after Marco's conviction passed in the exhausted blur that all new mothers experience. Elena learned to function on no sleep, to interpret Alexander's different cries, to navigate the terrifying responsibility of keeping another human alive while barely holding herself together. But somewhere in the chaos of feedings and diapers and pediatrician appointments, she started painting again. Small pieces at first, just sketches in the margins of Alexander's nap times. Then larger canvases. Working in the studio she set up in what used to be the formal dining room. She painted the house, the baby, her hands, older now, marked by time and struggle, holding new life. She painted memory and grief in the strange shape of survival. A gallery owner saw her work at a charity auction Elena had donated to, called and asked for a meeting. Within 6 months, Elena had her first show in 25 years. The exhibition sold out on opening night. Critics called her work raw and unflinching, praised the way she captured trauma and transformation in equal measure. They didn't know they were looking at her autobiography rendered in oil and canvas. Elena didn't tell them. She let the work speak for itself. Alexander turned one on a crisp fall day. Elena threw a small party. Just a few other mothers from her prenatal yoga class and their children. No one from her old life. They ate cake and sang off key and let the baby smash frosting into their faces. It was simple and ordinary and perfect. That night, after everyone left, Elena sat on the porch, watching Alexander sleep in his carrier beside her. The security team was gone now, the federal marshals reassigned to other cases. The threats had faded with Marco's organization, leaving only the normal dangers of living in the world. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Elena almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. It was Marco's voice, distant and hollow, through the prison phone system. "Elena, I wanted to call and say, to tell you." Her voice was firm. "No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to call and ask for forgiveness or closure or whatever you think you need. I just want to know about my son. If he's healthy, if he's happy. He's perfect, and he's mine. That's all you need to know." "Elena, please, I made mistakes. I know that. But I'm still his father. You're a sperm donor who made choices that put your child at risk before he was even born. You don't get to claim fatherhood from a prison cell." Elena looked at Alexander, at his small chest rising and falling with each breath. "I gave you 24 years of my life, Marco. I gave you loyalty and duty and everything I thought a wife was supposed to give, and you threw it away for my sister and your ego. You don't get anything more from me. Not forgiveness, not friendship, and definitely not access to my son." "Our son?" "My son." The judge agreed. "Remember? You signed away your rights as part of your plea negotiation. Alexander Voss has no legal father, just a mother who will do whatever it takes to make sure he never ends up like you." She hung up before he could respond, blocked the prison's number, and sat in the silence, feeling something that might have been peace. Marco tried to reach her 3 more times over the next year, through attorneys, through letters that Elena burned without reading, through his mother, who Elena politely but firmly refused to allow into Alexander's life. Then the attempts stopped. Either Marco had finally accepted that she meant what she said, or he'd found other things to occupy his time in prison. Elena didn't care which. She just cared that he was gone from her life completely. Alexander turned 2, then 3. He was bright and funny and absolutely fearless, climbing everything and asking endless questions about how things worked. Elena hired a nanny to help manage the chaos, enrolled him in a progressive preschool where nobody knew or cared who his father was. She painted, sold her work, and donated the profits to organizations that helped women escape dangerous relationships. She renovated the rest of the Blackwell Heights mansion, erasing the last traces of her childhood and her marriage, making it entirely her own. And somewhere in the process of rebuilding her life, Elena realized she was happy. Not deliriously joyful, not without moments of grief or regret or bone-deep exhaustion, but genuinely, quietly content with the choices she'd made in the life she was living. One afternoon, when Alexander was almost 4, they were in the studio together. He was finger painting at a small easel Elena had set up for him, creating abstract swirls of color while she worked on a larger canvas. His voice was thoughtful. "Mama, Jackson at school said I don't have a daddy. Is that true?" Elena set down her brush, wiped her hands, and knelt beside her son. "You have a biological father, a man whose genes helped make you. But he's not part of our lives, and he won't be. Why not? Because he made choices that hurt people I love, and I decided that you and I are better off without him." Alexander considered this, his small face serious. "Was he mean to you?" "Sometimes. Not in ways you'd understand yet. But yes, he hurt me. Then I don't want him either." Alexander went back to his painting, the matter settled in his mind. "I just want you, Mama. You're enough." Elena felt tears burning but pushed them back. "You're enough for me too, baby." Years passed. Alexander started elementary school, made friends, and discovered a love for building things that had Elena's studio filled with Lego creations and cardboard constructions. Elena's art career flourished, her work appearing in galleries across the country. She dated occasionally, careful, cautious relationships that never quite progressed beyond casual, because she couldn't quite let anyone close enough to risk the kind of devastation she'd survived once before. Maybe someday she'd be ready to try again. Maybe not. Either way, she was complete without a partner. She'd learned that the hard way. Marco died in prison when Alexander was 7. A heart attack, sudden and massive, no warning. His attorney called to inform Elena, to ask if she wanted to claim the body or attend the funeral. She said simply, no. He has family. Let them handle it. She didn't tell Alexander until he was older, until he asked again about his father and why he'd never met him. Then Elena sat her son down and told him the truth. An age-appropriate version, but honest. Your father was a powerful man who made bad choices. He hurt people, including me, and he went to prison for what he did. He died there when you were 7. Alexander processed this quietly. Do you think I'm like him? Because I have his gene like you. You have pieces of him and pieces of me, and mostly pieces that are entirely your own. What matters isn't where you come from. It's what you choose to do with who you are. I choose to be good, like you. Elena pulled him close, breathing in the scent of her son's hair. I'm not always good, baby. I've made mistakes too. But I try to do better, and I try to protect the people I love. That's all anyone can do. On Alexander's 10th birthday, Elena finished a painting she'd been working on for 3 years. It was massive, 6 feet tall, 8 feet wide, and it showed a woman standing in the ruins of a house, holding a baby in her arms while flowers grew up through the broken floors. The woman's face was Elena's, aged and weary but fierce. The baby was Alexander, painted from photographs of his first days. And the house was Blackwell Heights, transformed from mansion to ruin to garden in one continuous image. She titled it Survival and donated it to a museum that focused on women's stories. The curator who accepted it asked about the symbolism, the meaning behind the imagery. Elena said simply, it's about destruction and creation, about what grows when you stop trying to save what's already dead. Standing in the museum gallery, watching people view her work, Elena thought about the woman she'd been on Christmas Eve 8 years ago. The woman who'd walked into her childhood bedroom expecting peace and found betrayal. The woman who'd thought her world was ending. That woman had been right in a way. Her world had ended. But from its ashes, something stronger had emerged. Not perfect. Perfection was an illusion Elena no longer believed in. But real and honest and entirely hers. She'd survived Marco's betrayal, Livia's destruction, the federal investigation and the trial, and the constant fear that had marked her pregnancy. She'd survived becoming a single mother, navigating a world that judged women who left powerful men, building a career from scratch in her late 40s. She'd survived everything that should have broken her. And now, watching her son laugh with other children in the museum sculpture garden, Elena understood something fundamental. Survival wasn't the same as victory. It was better, because victory implied a battle won against someone else. But survival was personal. It was waking up every morning and choosing to keep going despite the pain. It was building a life from wreckage and calling it home. Elena had survived, and in surviving, she'd won something far more valuable than revenge or justice or vindication. She'd won herself back. Alexander ran up to her, flushed and happy. Mama, can we get ice cream? Absolutely. Elena took his hand, and together they walked out of the museum into the late afternoon sun. Behind them, the painting hung on the gallery wall. A woman, a baby, flowers growing through ruins. A story of destruction and rebirth. An ending that was really just the beginning of something.